Hello everyone and welcome to the CLI ALPMA Innovation and Legal Tech Week 2021. We are absolutely delighted to have you here and to join us for this session on connecting the dots between people and business performance. For those of you that have been with us for the whole of today, you'll know that in the sessions that preceded this one, we've been chatting quite a lot about the changing roles of people, particularly in the legal world, but professional services more broadly as well. And of course, the changing capabilities in terms of those changing roles, particularly again in legal practice. And there's been kind of drawing out a few things at a broad scale there, really a discussion about how we're really changing not just how we practice or where we practice, but in many respects, why we practice as well. And if we bring all of that together, of course, we can only practice at the end of the day if we have a business that is profitable and sustained behind it. And so that kind of very close connection between people and indeed connecting the dots to business performance is a critical one and what we're going to be focusing on today. So I mentioned, and I want to kick off by having these wonderful folks introduce themselves so that you know a little bit about them and their background in terms of the commentary that they'll provide today. And Jason, you're the first off the rank to be able to do this, and welcome to you all, by the way.
Thanks, Terry. It's indeed an honour to be part of such a formidable panel, and thank you very much for the opportunity. So my name is Jason Elias. I am a reformed lawyer. I started my career at Baker & McKenzie in practice, and after a few years of banking and finance, decided I wanted to move into something that was a bit more people-focused than document-focused. Like many people in my industry, I fell into recruitment, and I've been doing it now. I've had my business for 21 years. I've got a lovely team of 8 people based around Australia, all remote workers, or sometimes they come into the offices, you might be able to see in the background. But we're in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Byron Bay, and the Central Coast and Perth. And our focus is working with lawyers to find them good opportunities in corporates, government, and private practice.
So, Jason, I thought that the people were in the background there just to prove that it was a live session, but...
Yes, I hired them earlier today. They're from rentacrowd.com.
Thank you very much. And Deborah, I'm going to get you to do the same, if I may.
Terri, thank you. And I'm also delighted to be a panellist on this session today. So I'm Deborah Stonley, the Director of People and Culture at Maddocks. And last year, I clocked up 30 years in HR in law firms. So I've been around for a while. What I'm particularly passionate about and interested in is about developing and supporting organisational culture to deliver on business objectives. I really like and get excited about progressive HR strategies and the implementation of them. And a particular area of real interest in mine is career development, and particularly that senior associate pipeline through to partnership and the coaching and development work there. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
And we're going to be drawing on all of that expertise, I think, as we go through this, Deborah. So thank you very much for that. Emily, over to you.
Thank you. I'm also very honoured to be here today. I certainly have really enjoyed the sessions of the past few days and have been madly scribbling notes from all of the other sessions I've been able to attend. So I hope we do the same for all of the attendees on this session. I clocked up 20 years just in HR this year, 13 years with Piper Alderman this year. But I've worked in not-for-profit, local government, I've worked in startups, but for the past 13 years, I have been here at Piper Alderman. I started in a geographical role, so I looked after our Adelaide and our Melbourne offices and have been in the role of HR Director for the last 2 years here. I work directly with our Managing Partner, Deputy Managing Partner and Chief Operating Officer to be able to design what I consider to be delivering on the best experience for our employees. So that is an end-to-end experience, and I have varying favourites in terms of what we actually do in HR, but I ultimately think that it can be defined as that best experience, whether that be for the person that sits on our front desk or whether that be for our next senior associate that's going through to partnership.
Fantastic. So we're going to see whether we can get people to apply to your firm by the end of this session. Okay.
Check out our careers page.
We'll do it as that. We'll do that as a chat question.
Perfect.
And Natasha, certainly, last but not least, hi. Tell us about you.
Thanks for having me, Terry. It's great to be here. So I am currently the head of HR for Asia Pacific for the Boston Consulting Group. We have about 20,000 staff worldwide and about 5,000 in Asia Pacific. And about half of those are client-facing consulting staff of one kind or another. I didn't grow up in HR. I worked in banking, I worked for the Australian Trade Commission, but after my MBA, I went to work for BCG as a consultant. I did about 6 years doing that, and then I did another 6 years on internal people functions. And then I've left BCG, and where I was the executive manager of HR for a mid-sized healthcare company that was expanding overseas. And so now I've come back to be head of HR in Asia Pacific for BCG, which brings my knowledge of the business, and it's professional services, it's a partnership firm, along with how do you actually run an HR function out in the real world. And so, my reason for going back is that the business is at a tipping point, which many are in our space, because if we'd stayed just doing what we were doing, we would have become dinosaurs. And you've got to make the people, the workforce, align with what you're trying to do as an organisation. So it's a really interesting space to be in at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be pulling a lot of those themes apart as well. But we also thought, folks, and this has kind of come up again in sessions, particularly yesterday, as our business in legal particularly is changing so much, that it's so important to see that broader perspective from, for example, not just your own experience, panelists here, but also in terms of different industries and how we can bring that into this important discussion as well. So, folks, I wanted to break this down today. We have a bit of time to be able to delve into some of these topics, and I wanted to break it down by maybe setting kind of the foundations for some of the discussion and then launching off from those in many respects as well. So the 4 areas that we'll be covering today, folks, will be looking at legal business needs. So trying to identify those up front, and we're going to kind of focus on the big ones here as opposed to a lot of little ones. Looking at people capabilities, particularly for contemporary legal practice, as opposed to what they might have been, but what they need to be and what they're going to be, looking not too far in the future. Connecting this idea then of those needs with people capabilities. How do we bring that together? How do we connect the dots? And we're going to finish up by looking at the role of all of these folks, because all of you, in one way or the other, you're really the connectors in many respects between the people and the business. And so, your role, as you're going to tell us, has changed a lot too, and very critically as far as business is concerned. So I'm going to get everyone on this kind of session now to do a little bit of work and to go over to the chat function, again, kind of at the end of the screen. And I wanted you first to all drop in your response to this question. What do you think the most pressing business needs are in your law firm or your organisation right now? So just literally just drop those in, bullet points into chat. Will just give us a couple of minutes to be able to drop those in. And I'm going to ask the same question of all of our panellists today as well. And I'm just going to kind of read out a few as they come in. Retention of staff, change fatigue, keep them coming. There's lots of you here. Don't be shy. Jump into the chat. Well done. Finding staff with great relationship skills. Yeah, freeing up the author's time to focus on value add. Employee engagement in a hybrid model. Growing the business. Okay, so we've got some stuff around retention, adding value, folks that can get in and grow the business, stabilise business processes, keeping younger lawyers engaged, working in multidisciplinary practices, loads of them coming in now, leading and engaging remote teams, encouraging people that it's safe to experiment, finding staff interested in building a following, attracting top talent, coping with the changing learning curve, psychological safety. Fantastic. So lots of ones there. Obviously, a very broad range, and more are coming in. And I know that the panelists can see these as well. Things like digital transformation, so getting bit into the tech. There's a bit on change management here, motivating lawyers. So let me ask and start with you, Deborah, if I may, on this one. We've seen some of those there, and of course you may have those of your own. What do you think, say, the top three business needs are in your law firm today?
Yeah, so I saw our three needs, first of all, in that client piece. So it's how we now respond, connect, collaborate with our clients, and particularly their evolving needs now. So that was my first one. The second is in relation to wellbeing and engagement. And I think we've seen a lot of that come through on the chat bar there. And I'd include in that, all that work around, hybrid teams, flexible models, all of that in that area. And then the third is in relation to the strategic leadership capability that we need in our firms now. And it's now there are so many things, there's so many priorities, so many things to invest in. It's having that leadership capability to really be able to distill down what is the investment that we need to make, what's the focus that we need to have strategically, whether that be digital transformation, restructuring the business, rethinking the whole business model, investing in leadership capability. So they're the three areas that I think are the right for our business to be focusing on.
And that last one, particularly pretty tough now, Deborah, isn't it? Because the time parameters in which you've got to make those decisions and make those course corrections is so much more compact than it used to be.
Yes, yeah. The speed and time to do those things. And just, I think somebody, had on the chat bar there, just that ability also to be able to invest in something, but be prepared to recorrect as you go through with it as well, that agility that we need now in leadership.
Yeah. I mean, who would have thought we'd be using the word agile in relation to legal practice, but isn't it wonderful that we are?
Yes.
Emily, your top three, different, similar?
Quite similar. I had market responsiveness, and I think by that I mean both to our clients and to opportunities in the market. Having had 13 years in legal, certainly the recruitment pace has changed, which I'm sure Jason will talk about. But I think it's also about identifying that, talent is not always going to come at the right time.
Yeah.
And I think from market responsiveness, that's about being able to have a strategy which accepts that we will look at talent at all times. We will attract talent and we will retain talent at all times, not just in, a GFC or a pandemic. That's part of our kind of daily operations, that we want to be able to build the best business. But equally market responsiveness and being able to deliver the very best, of experiences to our clients, whether that be through digital means or whether it's our face-to-face, but certainly obviously in our core product. Change agility, so coming off of what Deborah's talking about there, is definitely something that is a priority. And that leadership capability piece, those two words just don't go away.
Yeah. And I guess on that, that part around basically, I guess, the workforce aspect of it, I mean, that's really, I know we're going to get into that, but that's really changed a lot as well, hasn't it? Because we used to just think about everyone being full-time. Well, that's certainly not what's happening now. So yeah, that's a fantastic point. So Jason, over to you. She called you out, so you're next.
Well, what's a law firm other than the minds that go up and down the lift every day? I mean, the IP is in the lawyers, and the brand of the firm is dependent upon the quality of those particular people. So talent management is the best way to describe it, I think, and that includes firstly the attraction piece, but also very importantly the retention piece. And I think it's important that those things are in balance. For me, the most important thing, and Emily raised it, is the idea of not being reactive. So not waiting for somebody to leave and everyone else to get overloaded with work before you start the process of looking for somebody else. So we're working actively on talent pooling, of having a database of people pretty much on the bench who are ready to go, and looking at ways we can encourage a range of people doing that, and particularly a lot of lawyers who maybe have had family duties or whatever, but now want to come back and don't want to do the typical presenteeism full-time load, but are able to lock into more project-based work or part-time or remote work. And I think there's a huge talent pool out there, and we're working on that. We're also working with close partner clients on how we can find a more appropriate fee structure, because the traditional recruitment fee structure doesn't make any sense these days. It's quite anachronistic. I think well-being is really important, and we can't overestimate the damage that has been done with COVID in psychological well-being. And I think that particularly looking after our people, sometimes when they're remote, the benefit of the collegiality and the water cooler talk in an office is not to be underestimated. And I think that some people are missing that. So being able to provide alternates for people who are working remote, and also transitioning people back into the workforce. And the word on the ground we have is that there are many lawyers that simply don't want to go back to what was the pre-COVID situation. And I think that a lot of partners used to spend their days clock watching staff and making sure they've done their certain number of hours. And I think that that concept is outmoded and has been for a while. But I think COVID is one of its benefits, if there aren't too many, was the catalyst for change in that concept of presenteeism. My final point would be culture, and how you adjust culture, particularly with inductions. If people aren't going to be in the office and don't get a chance to do onboarding and find out how people behave. But I think values and culture are critical, and that's what distinguishes firm A from firm B, and will tie into things like what attracts people and what keeps people. So overall, I would say that the talent management, the well-being, and the idea of firm culture are my key three.
And I guess critically, they're foundations to what we're increasingly referring to as the employer brand, and you just touched on that.
Yes, right? and the value, the employer value proposition at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Natasha, you know I'm coming to you now.
I've been waiting. So the top three business needs I see from BCG are growth, relevance, and talent. And nothing's new, it's not rocket science. But a firm like ours, and to keep great talent coming in, you've got to be able to get rid of the talent that maybe doesn't hit the bar. And so we need growth to be able to keep doing that. If you don't have growth, our whole model stops. So that's critically important. Relevance is about, we have to be, and this is probably the biggest catalyst for change, we have to stay relevant to our clients, and they don't just want the old, just give me a strategy pack in 6 weeks. We have to offer digital skill sets. We have to offer them digital solutions. You need data scientists, so we have to offer a whole different range of services to our clients now to be relevant and to keep growing. And then underpinning that is the talent piece, which is both about attraction and retention. And, where we used to just go to universities and business school and get the top MBA graduates in these programs, that's not where you're going to find a digital designer. Mm-hmm. And so those are the three things, and you've got to make those teams work together to be able to deliver the service that gets the money that grows the business.
Yeah. And I know we're getting into capabilities a bit, and that's kind of our next area, but it seems to me that all of the joint degrees in the world are still kind of expecting, in many respects, all of the skill set to belong to one person versus a whole bunch of specialists that bring specialist skills. And I think, in your world, Natasha, you've probably had to work that out a long time ago.
Yeah. So when I left BCG in 2013, and none of this was there, and it bubbled along from 2014, over about 3 or 4 years to get some critical mass. But that diversity of service offering to meet client needs is what's helped us stay relevant.
Yeah.
And keep having double-digit growth and things.
Yeah.
But we started off behind. You know, we weren't as quick to move as some of our competitors.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask all of you another question in a sec, but I want to...
Sorry, Terri, can I just add something there
please.
about what Natasha just said? I think that's really important to recognise. I often, having been actively involved in ALPMA for pretty much my whole 13 years at Piper Alderman, I find that is sometimes a demotivator for people, in the sense that people go, oh, they're already so far down their change journey. I won't, you know, it won't even start because there's no point. And I think that's really important. Like I've just been looking in the little chat function at the diversity of what actually why people join today, so that we can hopefully cover off on some of that content. But I think it's really important to be able to recognise, like, think progress, not perfection. Like, just in being able to start is an excellent point in being able to, as Deborah say, you know, align it to your strategy, and that just gets started. Don't get competitive with where other firms are at, because your change journey may be completely different than what mine is. You know, I might have lots of challenges that another firm doesn't, and they actually get to their strategy execution quicker. But I think that's important, because sometimes I know people leave these sessions and they're like, oh, that was great, but it's not for my firm. Like, oh, we couldn't do any of that. You can. Yeah. We all can.
I guess fundamentally we're all starting with what people and what our client needs are, which could be different at the outset, right? Which brings me to the question that I want to ask all of you, and also want to ask, if I can, all the folks in chat again, to throw this in there as well. And I want you to put your business needs hat back on again. So in terms of thinking about your business needs, is the most important strategy that you would have, to go to your point, Emily, a people first strategy or a client first strategy? And I just want you to type into the chat there, people first or client first. So whichever one you're going to choose. Okay.
Are they mutually exclusive?
Well, Jason, we're going to talk about that. Just bear with me. Maybe not. Okay. Whoa. Okay. We've got people firing up here. People first, not mutually exclusive. There you go. People first. Well, yeah, people first, because without them, you can't have clients. Okay. Clients are people too. Okay. Thank you, David. I know. Just a business strategy. Okay. People first, clients first. Okay. It looks like I'm going to say the overwhelming one here definitely is people first, and you folks can all see this for yourselves. Some client first and hire people that match. Okay, Emily, I know what you think, because you put in the chat. So you're people first. What about others? Deborah, what are you? People first?
Oh, I'm people first. Yes, get the people piece right, and then the clients will come. And that's how you build your brand, you build your focus that way. So I'm definitely people first.
Yep. Okay. Natasha?
I think you have to have both.
Okay.
And you have to measure both, and you have to track both. They have to be KPIs for leadership, because they're both equally important. So I would struggle to say one above the other in a professional services firm. Obviously, people are critical. But I think both.
Okay.
Sorry.
Jason, Jason, are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah, I think for my clients, predominantly law firms, for example, the people is the most important piece. And I'm in HR, so take that with a grain of salt. But I think for my business, we're very client focused as well, because we have to make sure that the people we are providing are the right sort of people for that particular client. So they do come, I think they go hand in glove. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Okay. So I wanted to circle back to you, Emily and Deborah, because you were people first. Why are you people first? Emily?
Okay. I think it forms the foundation of being able to understand and align your strategy. So understanding the people that you have, and I probably say this based on current market conditions. There's a couple of comments in there first saying get the clients and then you can get the people. I think that's a very difficult strategy to be able to adapt to in current environment. I also think that if you are a people first organisation, there's actually a lot more room for growth, in the sense that you can, align yourself with these people, you can understand what their career motivations and their development goals are, and that builds new business opportunities. versus being able to just service a particular sector of clients, looking for people that match those clients.
Yep.
So I think that there's more opportunity, people first.
Okay. Deborah, I know you've got some things here.
And look, I mean, I agree completely with Emily. You know, if you build things out with people first, people understanding the vision, understanding the strategy and delivering on that, you're then able to build out your client piece really effectively. And to have engaged people delivering on your strategy, delivering on that client offering, continues to, you know, grow your business, deliver success, all the things that we want in our business. So that's why I would focus on the people strategy first. And I agree with Natasha. I mean, you have to have both. I mean, when you think of how we measure partner performance, it's that ability to win work, to engage with clients, to lead client teams and to lead their people teams. So they're important, of course, but building it from the people side, I think can give you the edge.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the purpose of our session today is to look at that connection, right, between the people and the clients and how they come together, but also, you know, where do you start? Where do you start prioritizing? Is it people first or is it clients first? And we've seen some of the comments for that in the chat. I wanted to move on to kind of like the second area for us to look at today, which is looking at capabilities. What sort of capabilities stand out as being, you know, absolutely not negotiable in our organisations today? And we've started to touch on some of them, but I kind of wanted to get into that a little bit more, particularly given the background of what we've just chatted about. So chat people, you know, because you're doing a fantastic job putting all of this stuff in chat. I've got another question for you now. Again, please to throw into chat. What do you think the most important people capabilities are today in your law firm or your organisation? And I want you to be really discerning here. And maybe if you've only got one, put down one. If you've got three, put down three. But let's try and keep it to a maximum of three. So you really have to make some choices. So top capabilities, adaptability, okay. That's a good one. Growth mindset. Ability to align firm values and flexibility to adapt to change. Collaborating effectively. Uncommon sense, that's great. Openness to change, empathy, ability to listen, great. Curiosity, collaboration. Empathy comes up again. EQ, good judgment. Listening coming up again. Client management and knowledge. A yes attitude. Can do, yeah. Collaboration, EQ, drive. Digital capabilities, we've touched on that one a little bit earlier as well. Communication, strategic thinking, empathy, openness. Openness coming up again. Adaptability coming up again. Critical thinking, resilience, grit. Open to change, adaptability. So folks, you've had a chance to have a look at those and they're still coming, and please do keep them coming. And I know it's really hard to pull out only three, right? But I'm going to kind of try and hold you folks to that as well. So Emily, starting with you, what do you think the top three people capabilities are?
I do really struggle with three because in my head I've kind of got this quadrant of four that I so regularly kind of rely on.
You can go to four. We'll let you go.
Okay, fine. Okay, right. Okay, well, if I can go with my quadrant of four, that'd be great. So I think the ability to collaborate, I think, is essential. I think when you collaborate, you know how to resolve conflict, you know how to be able to leverage, you know where to push, you know where to pull, you know where to pace. And I think that you can really be that glue. And obviously in multidisciplinary teams, which I'm sure we'll touch on today as well, I just think that it is now not a nice to have, but it's critical, you know. So I know when, you know, we're undertaking our graduate recruitment campaigns that we are looking for these skills at a much younger level than what we have ever looked at before. And having a son who's 9, I'm trying to instill these skills, hoping that it might make him more employable later on. I think resilience and grit are really important. I think when you're in any type of change role or an evolving industry like our own, being able to be resilient to having a lot of no's and having a lot of naysayers, and you can't do that, it can't be achieved, that's always been a problem, don't worry about it. You know, having the resilience and the passion to be able to kind of pursue what you know can be achieved, and particularly it can be achieved with collaboration. Emotional intelligence is absolutely key. So, you know, collaboration doesn't work without it. And I think that ability to think strategically, so I liked the uncommon sense, that probably would be the way I would describe that as well. But that ability to be able to just spot something and say that's not good enough, you know, at a simple level, to be able to say we can do better, and being able to have that attitude and drive to making those, you know, kind of changes, whether they're micro or macro. I think they kind of make for a really well-rounded team member.
Yeah, absolutely. And Natasha, I wanted to throw this to you next, but with another little bit of a question attached to it as well, given your background. I guess in legal practices, we're still trying to develop, I think, the multidisciplinary approach to things and really see that work highly successfully. Within that environment that you work in, are there some capabilities, like core capabilities, that go across the board, irrespective of the role that you play or your specialism in the organisation? And how important is it to have those?
Yes, there are some. And what's interesting is that the actual piece about working in multidisciplinary teams is one of my three. Like, that's the capability we're having to build.
Yeah.
So that they understand what others do, and you actually have to learn different ways of working. You know, you don't always do a 100-page document that goes to a steering committee. You've got to learn real agile ways of working, not the fake agile where it just means we're a bit chaotic and we change everything. Yeah, but all the ceremonies and ways of doing that. So, you know, so that was one. But I think that the other pieces that I had do run across all of it. So I think you need self-awareness, right, however that plays out. But ultimately it lets you be a decent leader. And then the other thing is drive, hunger, commercial hunger. And none of those people, regardless of their skill set, will get to the top of their game if they don't have that, so that they can go and hunt for the work whilst they have this self-awareness to look after the people and engage with their clients. So yes, they do go across.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, I'm going to come to you last, if I may, but Deborah, I just wanted to visit with you for a second on your top three as well.
So my top three, first of all, with our leaders, that leading inclusively. I think we've seen through this period of time that those leaders that can lead inclusively through COVID have been able to guide their teams very successfully through this. And in some cases, we've seen teams really flourish and thrive with a leader that has led that way. In that leadership piece, you know, that openness and adaptability to change, but to lead others through change as well. For our people, I do see this increasing need to build this, you know, this strength in adaptability. You know, we've got a profession that hasn't required that behaviour to be so well developed. And so that is allowing people the opportunity to make mistakes, to fail, to experiment, to be curious, all of those sorts of things, building that into adaptability, but enabling that to happen. And the other is that digital literacy, that tech know-how, and really accelerating that. That's going to be so important if we're going to leverage this experience that we've had with remote working and now with hybrid teams. If we're going to be able to collaborate successfully, we're going to be able to connect and communicate both internally and externally. Embracing that technology and digital dexterity is going to be important.
Deborah, I wanted to pick up on something that was mentioned, I think also by Jason earlier on, but just looking at almost maybe in the same breath, but maybe slightly the flip side of agility around the mental health and wellbeing piece. Is resilience another really critical factor in all of this as well? And particularly, you know, I guess all of our resilience has been tested, particularly in many different ways over the last
Yes. So look, resilience is absolutely critically important. And I'm going to give you an example. 10 years ago, in a previous firm, we would do behavioural testing as part of our or behavioural assessment as part of our selection process with our seasonals and summer clerk programs. And resilience was one of the criteria that we rated very highly as a selection criteria. Because we do want to be bringing more resilient lawyers into the firm, but also then once they get in, just helping them build that resilience up. And I mean, COVID has been a time where our wellbeing strategies have been very focused around supporting people with their resilience and wellbeing. And in order to be adaptable, that resilience, and I think Natasha said it earlier, that self-awareness piece is so important. So yeah, absolutely, Terri.
And you know what's interesting in all of the conversation, and as we look at all of the chat here as well, there's been no mention of expertise in a particular specialism. Like you've got to be, have a really good legal knowledge, or you've got to have really good knowledge as a data scientist, because that's kind of the given now, isn't it? That's your ticket for entry. All of these other things are just incredibly important, which leads me to you, Jason. And, the thing that I think folks will be interested in knowing is we've all identified these things and it's been pretty consistent across the board. Are we actually seeing these things show up as job description criteria, if you like, when folks are coming to recruit lawyers or allied professionals, but let's focus for a second on lawyers. Are we actually seeing these things show up? Something that Deborah had mentioned?
I think they're probably not in the terms that we've discussed, but high emotional intelligence is obviously a key, adaptability, resilience. They might be couched in slightly different ways. But I think that there is both a growing demand from candidates to see that there's opportunities for these soft skills to be used beyond, the given legal expertise, but also for law firms to encourage and recognise these soft skills that particularly I think the next generation of lawyers are coming through. I think as I went through, I think the first cull was which university you went to and what marks you got at that. And then that might grant you an interview where you'd allow your personality and soft skills to show. I think now we've advanced quite significantly and firms in particular are looking at the whole individual and looking at these other things that are important.
How do we look at that whole individual in a recruitment process though? And the reason that I'm belabouring this point a little bit is if we're wanting to connect those capabilities to business performance, this is in many respects where the rubber meets the road, right, at the recruitment. And I would suggest also the onboarding is incredibly important in that as well. But just staying with the recruitment for the moment, we've seen a lot in the media, for example, about the increased use of artificial intelligence in relation to recruitment. And we've also seen discussion, and this is something I'm sure you, Natasha, but others will want to pick up on, not really the flip side, but in some respects the antithesis, which is, the use of psychometric testing in recruitment. And I'm just wondering, as we look at the legal industry, because we certainly wouldn't have been talking about any of these things not so long ago, how, if at all, are you seeing those things show up in the recruitment process now?
Yeah, well, I don't think psych testing is anything new. I remember going to Chandler McLeod in Crow's Nest in 1995 as part of my psychometric testing when I did my summer clerkships. And I think, it's probably less used as a determinant for selection. I was going to say, I think it's probably less used in selection and more used as a management tool to get the best out of the productivity of the individual going forward.
Okay.
As far as AI goes, I think that you've got to keep in mind the bargaining position. And at the moment, there's a massive, massive global talent shortage, irrespective of COVID. So you can't put too many barriers in the place of talent. And I think that getting to jump through too many hoops gives your competition a decided advantage. And it is a war for talent and highly competitive. With the AI, I think it's early days, and I cannot see how it'd be useful in recruiting talent in the legal space when there's such high demand and little talent pool. The exception may be at the graduate and summer clerk level, where there's mass, people are getting several hundred applications, and AI may be used for that. But I think there's a long way to go. And for example, the Amazon team that was put together to use AI was scrapped eventually because there was a gender bias involved. So I think that technology will need a little bit of ironing out, and nothing will replace the personal interface. What it may do is remove some of the more menial steps. But I think for me, the key is always going to be behavioural competency interviewing when you're meeting a candidate and working out if their culture and values, as well as their soft skills and technical skills, align. And then also you're doing your reference checking, because I think a lot of lawyers are particularly good performers and they can do well in a 1-hour interview, but until you do a detailed reference check from somebody who's supervised their work over a long period, you don't necessarily find out the true details and the depth of their abilities.
So I want to flip to you, Natasha, just to kind of look at that from the consulting world, and then come back to you, Deborah and Emily, just the same question around whether you're using it, where you see it used, if at all. So first to you, Natasha, how does it contrast, or is it similar for you in the consulting world?
So the pieces that Jason just said really ring true about the risks of it. It's not widely used, but the place that we would like it to work is in our graduate entry level place. You know, we have China market, and they might do a search for their graduates and have 10 or 20,000 CVs, which takes, a small team of recruiters a long time to look through. But we haven't found a solution that we like. And I think we're going to end up taking a step back and just going with some simple CV screening functionality because of all the risks with AI, and we're needing to broaden what we look for, not narrow what we look for. So we're right in that spot of it would help us efficiency-wise. It's not yet effective.
Yeah.
The psychometric tool thing is interesting, though, because yes, they've been used for a long time. We're only just starting to use it for senior hires, because there's always been a bit of, the network will know how they go, and I've heard of this person. But it's because it's now not just the commercial piece and the success you see that matters. We're actually using more things like Hogan or, whatever it is, to either inform their onboarding once they're here, or to bring it back further in the recruitment process. I mean, it feels like it's taken years for somewhere like BCG to open that they may need some help in testing behavioural competencies, but they're so important now that we're looking for all the ways you can.
And I think, because to go back to what folks are saying earlier, that retention piece has also become so critical as well. So you're wanting to make really good decisions as best you can, right? And get it matched up with and aligned with your business at the beginning. So Deborah, let me ask the same question of you, or comments that you might have in addition.
Yes, so look, we do use behavioural assessments for recruitment purposes and also for development purposes. And I find them very insightful, particularly around those behavioural competencies that we are looking at. And look, over time, also we're able to track then those behaviours also at those people that stay longer, those people that leave earlier. We're able to use data there. It's not very well built up at the moment, but that's where we're tracking with that. We did use AI for the first time last year, not for recruitment, but in getting our performance reviews through with our provider. He used us as a guinea pig. They had this AI technology. And look, it's got a long way to go, is all I can say. I mean, you've got to start somewhere with this. There were some themes that we started to see coming through that were helpful, but it certainly got a long way to go before we could present it to the business. We'll do the same this year to see whether with further refinements, we can improve things. But from a recruitment point of view, I agree with Jason. It is such a competitive recruitment market, and we've got to be making it, not putting barriers up there with that. And the personal interaction remains a critical part of winning candidates over. I mean, in the legal world, candidates could have up to 5, 10 opportunities that they could be considering at any one time. And you want that experience to be exceptional. And I think it will be a long time before we're screening out using AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily, what about you folks? How are you approaching all of this?
I think obviously in terms of, having undertaken risk assessment of what we would lose by introducing some digital solutions, I think that, like Deborah's saying, we do want to be able to give the best candidate experience. And, it is really important, coming from a recruitment perspective, to demonstrate that you have actually read someone's CV. So you've read their cover letter, you've read what they, have achieved to date. You might pick up on some things in an academic transcript, for instance, and you start to build a relationship with those people. But those are things that, having been here for 13 years, some of my first clerks are now partners. And I still make reference to some of the things that I remember from their interviews about them talking about what was important to them, and that comes back to being able to say, well, we've got a great connection, and, these challenges that we're facing, we can work through them together. And I think that, retention is such an issue within professional services broadly. If you don't have that relationship before you start the onboarding, you're probably never going to actually really achieve it.
I want to dig into capabilities a little bit more and to talk about something that is really kind of just starting to emerge, certainly in law firms, and to kind of get your thoughts in relation to this. We spoke earlier about the fact that business needs for law firms in particular, but I'm going to go more broadly for professional services firms, are changing. And, where law firms, it used to be all focused on lawyers, there really now is an ecosystem that's developed of many allied professionals. In fact, if we try and get one group of people to do everything, it just seems to be an impossible task. But in doing that, and in what you review when you're recruiting people, what comes to the forefront, we're starting to see some law firms, for example, certainly not a lot, recruiting folks out of high school, where we've certainly seen a number of different companies going more broadly outside the legal industry, basically actively suggesting to people that they don't need to have a formal degree, because they will come on board and they will learn what they need in experience. And the reason that I'm asking you this question is because, particularly for lawyers and for others, I think, that have been employed in law firms, now specialists very specifically in their own right, there's been such a focus on academics and far too little focus on the sorts of skill sets that are so critical that we've been talking about. So I wonder to what extent, as you reflect on business needs, which is this broader group of skills, as you reflect on the changing workforce, which includes a bunch of highly specialised allied professionals, how you're kind of managing that within this discussion of capabilities versus business performance. And Natasha, I wanted to, if I can, address that question first to you, and then I'll come to you, Emily, if I may, with respect to that.
So Terri, are you asking, are the same qualities like academic performance as important as they once were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or are we really considering that, in light of all that we've been talking about, are we really thinking about that in a different way now?
Yeah, okay. So it depends. I would still say that...
Lawyer and Natasha, by the way.
You still need super smart people to go and work for clients and help solve their problems, so we do, or else clients may as well, they can solve it themselves, right? And part of what we bring is a set of super smart people who can come and know how to do structured problem solving, etc. So there's a little bit of a base level that you need for the bulk of what we would do. To me, the thing is that the same hygiene factor for your average digital designer? And the answer to that's probably no. They probably need there's a different baseline for that, which will be, I don't know, it'll be something about the projects that they've worked on and the value that they've added, and it won't be that they've gone to some particular design school.
Yeah.
So that's how it depends. So yes, it's still needed, because ultimately you've got to deliver what you're doing with clients, but it will depend on the skill set and then what that is, the value that brings.
It's a really interesting point that you're making, Natasha, because a few years ago we actually did a survey, which folks may remember, with our friends at ELPMA actually, and we looked at the emerging professions. And one of the things that came out of that was that there was a different focus on, if you like, formal degrees versus experience for lawyers versus allied professionals.
Yeah.
And so what you've just said was very much borne out in that survey that we undertook, and it was answered by a good enough number of people for that to be truly reflective. So just a really interesting point that you're making there. And again, one that I'm focusing on, because if we are truly looking at the capabilities being across a whole bunch of specialists within an organisation, then these are the critical issues that we're going to have to consider in terms of being able to connect the dots to our business needs, right?
Yeah.
So let me flip to you, Emily, but I want to come to you, Deborah and Jason, on this as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Natasha has said. There is almost, kind of like a baseline agreement, but I think I even see that changing a little bit in shift as well, because I think it's also more, I suppose, about recognising that multidisciplinary team. So you can, if you look at the team structure holistically, you may have 60% of that team that have exceeded your academic or intellect, expectations, but that they can't, oh, sorry, my light's gone black. That you can't meet they can't meet some of the other capabilities, and have we yet to design a perfect human? I don't think so, apart from my fellow panelists. But I think it is really going to be about recognising group performance rather than necessarily individual performance. But in that also means that your reward and recognition has to be able to represent that as well. So, you can't only reward and recognise those who have the academic intellect and who might be able to meet those billable targets or those financial targets. You have to be able to recognise across the board as a group what that actually achieves. And I think that that's a really exciting place for where our law firms are heading, very slowly, but heading there.
I want you to hold it, because we're definitely going to come back to it.
Okay.
Hold that thought. We're definitely coming back to it. But yeah, what do you think about that, Deborah?
It's interesting what Emily says there. It's just the importance then, if we're going to enable our firms to go down this path, we have to align a lot of other activities to make that happen. I mean, reward is a very individual thing. There's not a lot that happens in terms of a group reward, but as we put these multidisciplinary teams together, we do need to then look at other things changing to support that. Otherwise, they'll fall over. Mm-hmm. Just, on the recruitment piece, yes, academic excellence is important. That does need to be part of the selection criteria. But of course, we've broadened that out so much more in the attributes that we're looking for and that we value. And I think, we need to be clear in our own firms of what are the attributes. The perfect human doesn't exist. It's that strengths-based approach, I suppose, with the whole team, but it's looking at those complementary skill sets and behaviours. I mean, I think we all know in our own teams that, when I'm recruiting for my own team, I'm often looking at a strength that I don't have, particularly in my senior team. So we're a well-rounded team with a lot of strength there when we work together. So it's bringing that thinking into more how we're recruiting and selecting on the legal side and other areas of our business.
And I guess too, looking not too far ahead, and assuming that we truly are going to be looking increasingly at working in multidisciplinary teams, there's got to be a career path for everyone, right? Not just the lawyers, because otherwise to go to a law firm, to go to the war for talent issue that's come up a few times, it would be an extremely career limiting move if you were in any specialism other than law. So I don't know, but Jason, you may tell me again on the recruiting side whether we're kind of seeing that. Are we seeing not just the outreach to allied professionals, but also in that outreach there are more distinct, if you like, levels of opportunity and advancement within a career path within those in the legal world?
I think there has always been a dichotomy of fee earners versus non-fee earners, and I imagine that is not as bad as it was when I was last in practice, which is 21 years ago. But I think if you are a person who's a professional in an area outside of law, and you feel like you're treated as a second-class citizen, then that is going to be, the career limiting is going to be mental as well as literal. So I think that it's important that law firms now embrace these other skill sets, and I've seen it because I'm close to a lot of BD professionals. When I was still in practice, the BD person was often the person that put on a fun event and organised golf balls and T-shirts, whereas it's really advanced into them being critical, and you now see these people with whether it's an HR skill or a BD or marketing skills having seats at the table, and a lot of the firms being more corporate in their structure and less who's the partner with the most mileage on their tank that becomes the senior partner. So I think that's a really positive move. I think it's probably still got a way to go. And I think the other thing that is probably the elephant in the room is that there is a whole other world for lawyers out there in the in-house environment and in commerce. And I think when I went through law school, we'd have a career day and all the firms would turn up with their booths, and the holy grail was to become a very senior partner in one of the well-regarded firms. In those days, it might have been Mallisons or Minters or one of those ones. And I think now, if you were to survey law students and you said, what's your ultimate utopia, they'd probably say, I'd love to be the general counsel of Facebook or Google or one of the tech companies. And I think that you'll find there's a lot of people who see law firms as maybe a pathway to an in-house life or even government. And there are a lot of people who are doing very well with law degrees in commerce, as there always have been. So I think that the holy grail of partnership is probably not where it once was. And I think that firms are sort of adjusting closely to give people a good, strong career path where they can see a really good, positive future with things like flexibility and work-life balance that have not been synonymous with private practice traditionally. And I think COVID will be a catalyst for that.
Thank you for that. Natasha, I wanted to move on to a slightly different but related topic, if I may, and it's one that Emily has touched on. So I'll come to you on this one as well, Emily, but it's this kind of whole idea of really looking at performance evaluation quite differently. And I guess as we look at law firms, and we would have to do a whole day on this to do justice to it, so forgive me, but we've been focused very much on equating performance and really almost equating value of our employees, particularly based on the billable hour. So how many billable hours do we have? And therefore that kind of dictates your bonus and whether you're going to be, promoted and indeed all manner of things around compensation. If we are going to really place emphasis on the sorts of capabilities, and we've said that these capabilities are critical to business performance of the sort that we've been talking about, how does that change the nature of performance reviews, of compensation, of how we evaluate people? And I'm asking you because I think it's one of those things that in the consulting world, they've probably grappled with, even to some extent more so than the legal world.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
So you have to have performance have the interpersonal targets and metrics and things, as well as the commercial. And so there's two ways that we do it in our firm. At the more junior levels, generally, you won't actually get promoted through to the next one if you are not behaving in the way that, you know, shows self-awareness, treats people with respect, etc. I mean, I don't think that we would promote people who were super strong commercially and just awful interpersonally. Now, it doesn't always happen like that, but on the whole, that generally doesn't happen. So that's one thing. But of course, you know, the commercial piece, when you're on a don't know which way to fall, maybe you let the commercial piece push the decision. To me, the really interesting thing is what we've done over time with leadership metrics. And for our partners who are heads of geographies, offices, regions, etc., so our leadership, they not only have commercial targets, but they actually have targets around, you know, the people elements that are important to us. So around engagement. So we take our annual engagement survey super seriously, and our senior leaders are measured on it. Around diversity, so that's another key strategic people priority that we have. So they would actually have a target for the percentage of women that they hire in their office. And when they go through their annual assessment, yes, the commercial side gets looked at, but their bonuses will be determined by whether they have hit some of these metrics as well. And for the senior people, so besides metrics, the upward feedback is very powerful in determining their bonus and whether they get promoted to the next level of partner. So we spend a lot of time aligning on what those handful of metrics are, getting the buy-in, measuring it, and then making sure that people's comp and reward, etc., is tied into it. You know, is it perfect? No. Do you get bad behaviour? Sure. But on the whole, I would say that works really effectively, and the culture plays out along those lines as well.
And it's certainly where that connection between business and performance really starts to come into play, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I remember when I was, you know, leading talent management functions in some very large law firms, where we were still looking at the metrics in terms of what was then called non-billable time. So the amount of time that you spent on pro bono was a non-billable time. The amount of time that you spent in coaching and mentoring was still collated in hours, but it was non-billable time. We do seem to have a fascination with non-things in the legal industry that we need to get over for lots of different reasons. But, you know, I see that suggestion coming up again, Emily, that, you know, we start the way that the metrics that we're going to use in law firms will be, yes, let's record this as non-billable time. And I kind of shudder when I see that. How have you folks kind of approached this at Piper Alderman?
I think Natasha's right. I think in those early years, it is really about behaviours, because you're wanting to be able to reinforce, to say, you know, if you want these promotional opportunities, you have to be in control of what you can be in control in, and you're in control of your behaviours. You're not necessarily in control of your billable targets, because that's at the whims of what you're fed. But you are in control of your behaviours day in, day out. You know, and obviously, you know, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So it's not just about your behaviour, it's about how you influence others. So it's instilling those early leadership, you know, capabilities that we want to be able to see transgress, obviously, through as they go through the ranks. You know, will the role of partner exist in 20 years? You know, there's a lack of interest in it at this point, so we'll see where it goes. But I think from a monetary perspective, I think it's a really interesting place in the sense that there are a number of strategies at play. I know that there are a number of firms that show partners what they could have earned, and then they show them the actual amount they're going to earn based on adjustments of saying you did not meet these following targets. So I think that there is, you know, carrot and stick. I think equally it is about recognising that reward is very personal. So, you know, we are embracing these hybrid workforces. And so you look at something like what the pandemic has created. So in people being able to have a greater amount of flexibility, firms being able to have a greater sense of trust in their employees in being able to remote work, in whether that be hybrid or on more extended basis, that people value that, you know, and then it's about saying, well, we've achieved that, but what will you value next? I think that it comes down to being able to have more a menu of options rather than being able to say, well, you've achieved X, so you will receive X. Well, I didn't want any more money. I actually wanted more flexibility, or I actually wanted a junior staff member so that I could start to train them up so that I could go off and investigate something else that I'm really interested and really passionate about. And I think that genuinely comes back to, again, that first point of contact that you have with candidates at the start is about understanding those motivators. Generally, those motivators don't really change too much. They're in the genomes of us. And I think it's about exploring them a little bit more, but having a tapas menu than just saying chicken or beef.
Yeah.
And can I just add that that's probably a key to retention as well.
Yeah. And it also seems to me, Deborah, and I wanted to draw you on this also, is that some of the things that we're talking about here are almost foundation stones for culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, focuses around things like diversity, equity and inclusion, focus on things like, you know, coaching and mentoring versus boxes and performance review. So, you know, they're kind of, that's really starting to describe a very different workplace, isn't it? A very different culture.
Yes. Last year, we rolled out a capability framework for lawyers. So every single level capability, and we were able to actually put it into use last year. And it was very helpful when we were working remotely, because the partners and the lawyers had a shared language to talk about performance, and the lawyers were very clear about expectations. It's just a one-pager for every single role, and has 4 key competencies and then a number of sitting behind it. So that's been a real way for us to move away from the billable hours as being the focus of any conversation, particularly around REM, and being able to look at the whole person through the lens of this capability framework. And one of the gems of it has been there's a role essence for each position. And so it's 2 words that describe that position. So even for a partner that's having a discussion, let's say with a graduate lawyer, the 2 words that describe the essence of that role is engaged and learning. So even if they just spend their time, you know, talking about their career and what they're achieving just at that level, we found in the feedback from both the lawyers and the partners is it did lead to a much richer conversation. And ultimately, I think, you know, it led to lawyers really being able to perform strongly through this through last year.
Leads me to this question, and it's come up a lot, and it's one of the questions that's been posed here, and I want to put this, if I may, to all of you. And the question is, there's been a lot of talk about resilience. How do you recognise resilience in people? Great question, by the way. Let me start, if I may. I'll come back to you first, Deborah, on that one, but I do want to get your thoughts from everybody.
Well, how I would recognise resilience is really how they've been able to adapt to change. How easily they are able to take on board feedback. And that comes back to that self-awareness piece as well. You know, if you've got a reasonable level of self-awareness, I think that really helps. It's foundational for resilience. So taking on board feedback. Dealing with setbacks. We all have setbacks, how people deal with setbacks there. And also, having the confidence and curiosity to be trying new things, often I look at in terms of a person's resilience.
Yeah.
So there'd be a number of factors that I would look at for resilience.
Natasha, how do you recognise resilience in someone?
I particularly like, Deborah, your second point around the setbacks. So I would ask people, if we're looking for this when you're interviewing people, questions around where have you failed at something, what did you learn from it, and so looking for things generally that have gone on in their past and how they've coped with it. When someone's had a really cruisy path through and they don't give you anything in that, I can't see it. So it's the grit, and often actually it would be where have they achieved something that was really difficult, and what did they have to overcome to do it. So I would interview people with a lot of time spent on those things, and I get somebody else to test for the technical skills, because the technical skills are the baseline, and in my organisation anyone can test for the technical skills. So how can I add value and test for stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, you mentioned that earlier on, that the importance of behavioural interviewing, which is what Natasha was referring to, an integral part of the work that you're doing, presumably with folks as well.
Yes, and especially the reference checking side as well.
Mm.
And you can always check with referees on areas like resilience and how they deal with feedback, how they deal with constructive criticism, how they deal with setbacks, and how quickly they bounce back, and how they cope with those things. I usually say a question like, how long are you prepared to stay on the phone with Telstra tech support?
Yeah.
So
I'm mentally calculating my own resilience now, Jason. Thank you for that image. Emily, how would you say that you can kind of spot resilience in someone?
I think it sounds like the four of us could certainly sit in parallel rooms and be interviewing with very much the same techniques. I spend more time asking about willingness to fail. Because obviously from a perspective within the legal industry, the mental health issues that they face are so considerable. And one of the really, I suppose, more pertinent issues at a junior level is that the masking of mental health issues. Whereas if you really explore that willingness to fail and what has been their experience and what did they learn from it, and how might they apply that again, how might they support someone else that has failed, I think that's really around that resilience factor. And I think it's about encouraging them again to be able to know that they can do that regularly. It's not the thing that they're going to do once. They may fail in that area a couple of times, but being able to say that each time you will learn something a little bit differently, and encouraging that as a cultural aspect, I think is really important.
Can I add something here, Terri, if you don't mind? There's a really interesting book called The Startup Nation, which is about Israel and how it has developed sort of like a Middle Eastern Silicon Valley. And one of the things they attribute the success to is the ability to have a go. And it's part of the culture that if you have a go and fail, it's actually not frowned upon. It's probably seen as, well, you had a go, that's great. Even if you did fail, it's better that you had a go. Whereas I think part of our culture is very much, you're better off not trying and failing than to have a go in a lot of regards. And I think that if you look at the way we get lawyers in this country, there's often a bit of a process where you have people who are at the top of the school academic tree who don't like blood, might get funneled into law. And then you have those ones that are fighting to get the top marks to be able to get the plum clerkships and graduate things. It does, much against the theory of neurolinguistic diversity, it does narrow down the sort of people that are attracted and actually get to that stage where they become baby lawyers. And it's kind of, I find it quite surprising that law firms aren't even more dysfunctional than they actually are when you look at all these A-type people in very small confines competing. It's almost like those Siamese goldfish that have to have their own puddles, and then all of a sudden you stick them in one puddle. So there's a lot that could be studied on this, and I think there should be some good longitudinal studies on what makes a good lawyer, and I'd love to see when you zero in on managing partners or really successful partners, and then you trace them back, what was their experience? What were the characteristics that made them successful? How important was resilience versus, for example, business development nous? How important were old school ties versus, the ability to empathize with down to earth? All these factors that we're making assumptions on, it'd be really interesting to see somebody doing a good study on it.
I think that, one of the best that I've seen and has been updated over time is the work from Dr. Larry Richard, who also coincidentally or not did a session for us on resilience in the on-demand program for this event. And he's looked at so many of those characteristics, and there'll be probably almost everyone, certainly all of you, very familiar with his work of looking at lawyers and certain factors or criteria versus the general public, and lawyers then and now, because as I say, he's updated his work over time on certain factors, one of which is resilience, do not generally as a group fare as well on the resilience scale. But to me, kind of exploring these things and others are so intricately connected with the changes that we're looking at in practice. If we're going to be able to be innovative, adaptive organisations that can manage change and so many of those capabilities that we were looking at before, and if we see the integral connection between people and business, we've got to be looking at these factors in our workforce, because otherwise we won't see them in our organisational capability.
I agree. And Terri, it's interesting that UNSW Law School has introduced an interview as part of their process rather than just an ATAR.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to do a quick round robin on that. Is that a fair comment? And thank you for that, Jason. Is that a fair comment that we've got to see that integral connection because it's there? Natasha, Deborah, Emily, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a real challenge. I was certainly really excited to hear that, Jason, because it's almost like the ATAR has already removed a lot of the diversity of candidates before we even have a chance to be able to say, you can thrive with me. It might not be suitable for another firm, but in fact, you're ideally perfectly what I'm looking for. This notion of the ATAR is already taking that A-type model, saying, oh, well, technically, probably, you've come from a private school or you've come from a more than, privileged kind of background. And I'm so excited to be able to see the outcomes in the next few years of the graduates from the uni.
Yeah. Deborah?
You look at, just broadening out when you do interview on a summer clerk or seasonal program, and broadening out the universities that you're selecting from. You just look at the greater diversity that over the years we've now been able to get in our workplaces as a result of doing that, moving from that very conservative approach of only looking, at 2 or 3 universities, now looking more broadly than that.
Natasha, I just want to come to you. Any thoughts or comments on that before I move on to our final section?
No, I don't think I've got anything different to add. Directionally, it's where we need to go.
So I wanted to spend our last bits of time together, and Fiona, I'm just going to get you to launch the poll for us in just a second. I wanted to focus on all of you and what you do. I said at the beginning that, really as we look at the difference or the combination or connection between business performance goals and capabilities and connecting those dots, that you folks are the connectors. You're connecting the dots. So I wanted to just launch this poll and ask folks, with the senior HR role, human-focused role, if you like, in your organisation, would you classify it at this point in time as being more strategic, more operational, or a mix of both? So if we could just take a couple of seconds to respond to that. The poll's up. Just give you a couple of seconds. You folks don't get the opportunity to vote on this. Sorry, panellists.
See that.
Just a couple more seconds. Thank you for that. Fiona, let's close the poll and see what everyone said. Oh, a mix of both. Okay, so probably slightly more operational than strategic, but a mix of both there. So very interesting. Thank you for that. Let me ask you, on the back of that, how important is it for the senior human-centred role to have a seat at the strategic table? And Deborah, I'm going to ask you that, or address that question to you first, if I may.
Okay, all right. Look, so the bottom line is no firm, organisation is going to reach its full potential if HR doesn't have a seat at the strategic table. I mean, I think for all, the practitioners, the senior HR people in organisations, we've got to be able to interpret the firm's strategic plan and then be able to align our people's strategies to the strategic plan or the strategic priorities of the firm and really develop our plans around that. And I must say, I have found that the more I can do to reinforce that connection between the people strategies and how they are driving and supporting the firm's strategy, the more engagement and support that I have had from the stakeholders to invest in those initiatives. So, when I started 2.5 years ago at Maddocks, first 6 months really understanding and interpreting the strategy, and then I got all my senior HR managers together, and over a couple of sessions, we then developed our people and culture strategy. And one of the gaps that we saw was if we were going to deliver as a firm on our sustainable growth strategy, we didn't have the talent acquisition in place to do that, the talent acquisition. So we invested a lot in that in terms of people capability and resources technology. But aligning those two is how I got all of that through. I don't think with that alignment it would have happened.
How about for you, Emily? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Deborah more. I think my experience was 11 years not at the table, 2 years on the table. So what you can achieve in 2 years versus what I achieved in the first 11 are considerably different. But I suppose I would preface that with the fact that we're all change agents and that we can all have roles of influence. So, if you are working in a firm that doesn't allow you, the seat at the table, you still have a hell of a lot of power to be able to drive change. And I'm not surprised at the results of that little poll there. From a HR perspective, a lot of what we do or what we deliver can look operational. And it is because it is aligned to the strategy. But obviously, sometimes with operational work, that's how we build trust with our stakeholders in being able to say, but look at the return on investment that we've got with these particular initiatives or these particular projects. And sometimes that might not seem as directly related to the strategy as actually what it is from a HR perspective. And maybe that's something that HR practitioners can do a better job of.
And there has been a lot of press about, the changing role of HR. And a lot of it has been focused on the fact that it's kind of moving into that more trusted advisor, business partner, strategic type of role. Is that true in consulting as well, Natasha, do you think?
Yeah, so HR would certainly have a seat at the table in a firm like BCG. Even on our executive committee, so the BCG board, we would have a client-facing partner who would have responsibility for the people portfolio, who would be on there only with that lens. I want to build on Deborah's piece though. So you need them there for the commercial context. I also think you need them there to influence change and behaviours and opinions in your senior people. Okay, so you need to, because they're the ones that can stop or support things to happen. And so you need to understand where the resistance is at a senior level for anything that you might be trying to do to support the business strategy, so you can cut it off at the pass rather than get down 2 years down the path and lots of investment and find that you don't achieve anything. So, there's many reasons, and in our organisation, which does put people first, I would say puts people before commercial. I've watched it all through COVID, and HR, senior HR would be very strategic. They usually come from within the business, and the business, obviously the business, so the consultants are known to be strategic. They've grown up learning that skill.
And within that role, within that more strategic role, because this comes up a lot across the board, how important now is the use of data in terms of making?
I can only assume that it's like this in a law firm, but you know, BCG goes to clients, so I'm going to answer it in a roundabout way.
Yep.
The thing we take to clients the most is using data and analysis to break down their problems and get to answers. That is part of the whole culture and the way the business thinks. So if you're going to drive any change within the organisation, you have to use data and analysis and logic to explain why to do it. So all of our people agenda is supported by data. We measure everything. Yeah, we probably measure it too much, but you would almost never have a discussion about something to implement or do without the data, whether that's about retention, you know, retention, attrition, engagement, career span. I mean, whatever that is, there'll be people-related metrics. It's critical.
Yeah, just part of the way that things work. It sounds like. Deborah, do you think that's true for law firms as well? Are you a data diva?
I think law firms have been slower to adapt to all of that data. I mean, we've always had bags of financial data. There's been never any shortage of that. But the other metrics, we're building those out all the time. And what's wonderful now, I mean, we've got systems now that can deliver that data much more easily. But when you're presenting that data to boards and to management committees, they are really getting that now and wanting more of it. So I'm really delighted to see that. So, you know, turnover data, they're really wanting to understand that more, what's sitting behind that, all the data around gender pay gap. And now we've been able to build a lot more that sits behind that can explain where some of our decisions and some of our results are as they are. And it's really great to see now that the boards and the management committee wanting this. I've always said that, you know, we need this information to be able to make better business decisions. So just in our P&C area, just on that talent acquisition piece, just now having the data of where our people are coming from and then looking at retention there, we now have got a better idea of where we're going to have greater success in attracting and what we need to be put in place for retention as well. And you can only do that when you've got your data.
Folks, sadly, I have to bring this discussion to an end, and it's been a wonderful discussion. But I wanted to ask you to do, literally, if I can go around and ask you to do a 30-second soundbite on this. In terms of connecting business performance to people, what's the thing that you really want folks to remember from our discussion today? And Jason, I'm going to start with you, if I may, on this one and go round.
I think you need to have the evidence. I agree with that data discussion. We've just invested very heavily in mapping every lawyer in New South Wales, and we'll expand it out. And we will know who their admission date, where they've worked. If a client comes to me and says, we'd like to know who works in our firm, we've got the data now to say, well, you've hired 7 people from this firm in the last 2 years. So that shows that, and they're all there and it's working out well. So we can find patterns within the data to make sure it's a good long-term match for both retention and to get the best quality person. And I think, you know, it can no longer just be art. There has to be science in it. And we're spending a lot of time mapping and doing the data crunching to make sure we do our job more effectively.
So become a data guru is what I'm taking away from that one. Natasha, over to you.
So it's going to be a build, but a different angle. I would say what gets measured gets done.
Right.
And therefore, measuring and tracking what you're doing in HR on the people side of things and shining a spotlight on differences and the transparency and holding the right people to account lets you further the agenda. So the more transparent you can be about who owns what and how they're going, etc., you know, you then empower everybody else to be running your agenda. So what gets measured gets done would be mine.
Transparency and metrics, great one. Deborah, over to you.
Mine would be the alignment of your people strategy with your business strategy. Get that right, and you then can really influence your P&C activities and influence the stakeholders in shaping, you know, the culture of your firm through your P&C activities.
Fantastic. And Emily, the last word is yours.
You all took my top three.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks. A little bit of a difficult end. So I'm going to go more behavioural, and I'm going to say create a culture of curiosity.
A culture of curiosity. That's a great one. Okay. Well, folks, as I say, amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Jason, Natasha, Deborah and Emily. Really just an amazing discussion. And I know that there's lots of questions and we can only get to so many of them in this session. So please do connect with all of these folks through at least social media, if not other means, if you have other questions and would like to reach out to them. This session will become part of the on-demand program. So if you want to watch it again or recommend it to folks, please do. They'll be able to see it, and it will also be a podcast. So if you would rather listen to this than watch it, that will also be an opportunity as well. If you'd like to receive updates about the work of the Centre for Legal Innovation or ALPMA, please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that having been said, thank you everybody for attending today and spending your time with us. We appreciate it, and it's been an absolute pleasure to spend the time with you. So
thanks, Terri.
Thanks you, Terri.
Thanks, Terri. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.